Walid, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. We're excited to have you. And for our audience, Walied Soliman, a leader in our legal and business community. Many of you would already be familiar with him, but what a great way to get to learn a bit more about Walid than our podcast. Walid, thank you again for joining me here today.
Gary, thank you for having me.
I was actually looking forward to this myself as much as our audience was because while we've had a chance to connect on a variety of occasions, we never get as much in depth in regular discussions like you would in a podcast. So, Walid, typically, what I love to learn from everyone that has done our podcast historically is a little bit about who Walid is, a bit of your upbringing and your family background, and then we'll go into the professional side of things.
Well, a little bit about myself. My parents came to Canada from Egypt in the 1970s. I was born in Toronto. I've got four brothers. There's five of us. We grew up in Toronto and then in Mississauga. I'm married. I've been married for 23 years to my high school sweetheart, Dina. We have 7 children, so we've got a big family. I have been practicing law for 23 years now, and I have been the chairman of Norton Rose for 7 years now. My area of expertise is in the area of what we call special situations. So, launching hostile bids, defending hostile bids, launching proxy fights, defending proxy fights, dealing with special M&A transactions, getting companies ready for potential contested situations. So running sort of the whole gambit of that. That's probably the little elevator pitch about me.
No, and that background is great to understand. Walid, often our upbringing is such a critical piece to who we end up being. And Walid, one question I like to ask is: often we'll have this key people in our lives that tend to be a big influence to, whether from a career perspective or the upbringing stage. And often I ask for one, but feel free to mention more than one if you can narrow it down. Who do you think has had the biggest influence on you, sort of as an individual, either again, sort of through upbringing or in your career?
Yeah, I think I've been very lucky to have many. So definitely my father and mother. I often wonder what I would have been if my father had not made the choice to leave Egypt. I don't know. I don't think I'd be the global chair of a law firm. So I don't know what I'd be doing, but I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing now. So I'm very grateful for that. And obviously that was formative. My father particularly, he brought us up to be very open-minded, curious. Both my mother and father were engineers. They didn't care for either of us to be engineers. They actually didn't care what we did. They didn't care who we married. They really were. They really left it to us, and just wanted us to be as sort of successful as we could be, and so for sure that was pretty transformative. There was a fellow by the name of Jeff Lyons who was transformative in the early part of my career. Jeff has passed away, but he was probably the first. He was the first active lawyer that I met that sort of took me in and showed me what a law firm looks like and what the potential is in law and what the different types of law is. And he treated me like a son when I was, in my late teens and sort of early 20s. And in my actual career, I've had a number of people. There was a woman named Jackie Moss, who was the general counsel of CIBC for many years, and she was quite transformative. Norm Steinberg, who was the chair before me at Norton Rose, was quite transformative. So I think the story of anybody, it would be hard to sort of single out one person. There's usually a lot of people that you've been blessed with the capability to have them sort of by your side, either as sponsors, mentors, guiders, and I'm sure I'm missing a couple of dozen from that group, but that's a pretty good representative group.
Waleed, a lot to unpack there. So certainly a lot of mentors, and how critical that is to who we end up as professionals down the road. Also, what a great country we're in. To your point, with where would you have been if the family had not come, and sort of the opportunity presented in Canada. I know you've been very passionate about that over the years as well, and what this means. Both of you and I being in the same shoes, the sort of as well, in my case, as an immigrant myself, but it's really, I think the opportunities that Canada provides are unparalleled.
Unparalleled, absolutely. But I'll tell you, it's something we have to protect, Gary. I'm quite passionate about that. One of the things I often wonder is whether, the 26-year-old version of my father today would make the same decision he made and come to Canada. And I don't know the answer to that, by the way, which is a little bit scary. And it's something. So I think it's something we can't take for granted how great this country is, and we have to keep working on it to make sure that for generation after generation, it is the choice place for top quality people around the world who are interested in building their lives.
And Walid, this was something I was going to ask you a bit later in the podcast, but since we're here on the topic now, what advice do you have for whether political or business leaders? Like, how do we keep that Canadian dream alive? What are things we should always be mindful of and encourage our leaders to think about in order to make sure that we continue to be that competitive and that beacon of aspiration for the world?
I think it's very important for business leaders and aspiring business leaders to travel to business centers around the world to understand what our competition looks like. I think you cannot be an effective political or business leader if you haven't visited India, if you haven't visited Singapore, if you haven't visited Hong Kong, if you haven't visited Dubai, if you haven't seen what's happening in places like the Netherlands. You cannot be a successul business leader, because I think what you realize when you go to Sao Paulo, Brazil, I would add to that list. I think what you realize once you've seen those places is that we've got a lot of competition. We've got a lot of competition for where issuers are established. We got a lot of competition for where issuers are financed, and we have a lot of competition for where issuers are going to grow. And there was a time when I think just having the rule of law, a capital markets that was operational, not even competitive, but operational. I think there was a time when that was enough. When we were still able to attract the top mining investors around the world to PDAC, and we were able to attract the top entertainment world to the Toronto International Film Festival, and the top oil and gas exploration issuers from around the world looking to raise capital. Now the choices are everywhere. There are so many choices in the world. Issuers and capital are going to flow to places where they're sometimes just geographically closer, and sometimes where there is a lower, regulatory and legal burden. So we've got to be really careful. We've got to be really, 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 really careful to ensure that, Gary, the fruits of of everything that we appreciated and that we gained in our years here in Canada are available to future generations, and we cannot take that for granted. And I'll tell you, I think we're actually behind right now, and we're at real risk of losing our position globally if we don't make a difference. That's not a political statement, by the way. That's not a liberal conservative statement. I don't think actually it would make too much of a difference who's in charge. That is a what is the business community doing? What is our regulatory community doing? What does where do you know where do what do our sort of citizens want to see? So that's there's quite a bit there for us to look out for.
And Walid, I couldn't agree more. I mean, as you get more stability and more development throughout different parts of the world, that competitiveness naturally becomes organic. It's almost like as we keep evolving, and some of these places evolve faster naturally. It's almost like where the countries are businesses in their own respect, competing for market share, so to speak. And being competitive from a business perspective also leads to an immigration perspective, because if you're a place that provides opportunity, then obviously you attract immigration, etc. And that's been something that historically we've been very attractive as a country, but in time, then as some of these other economies emerge and regions, then even from an immigration perspective, we may not be as attractive. So these go hand in hand, and I think that's to the point earlier. We need to make sure we stay competitive. Really, really appreciate those thoughts, and I think they'll really resonate with our audience as well.
Absolutely, no, it's something that we can't take for granted.
Walid, I'm going to shift back a bit to your legal career, and I'm going to start very early on. What attracted you to law in the first place? Why did you decide to go into law with parents that were engineers?
I think I had probably a made for television understanding of the law. So I didn't really know what it was that I'm doing right now. I didn't even know that existed. I thought I was going to be a sports lawyer. I thought that was going to be very fun. So I think that I was attracted to something that I think wasn't actually law. Learned very quickly that there isn't really something called a sports lawyer, and I went into M&A and special situations, and I've truly loved it ever since. I absolutely love what I do, and I'm very grateful to be part of the profession.
And Walid, that shift in itself to go into special situations, it's something that you don't just stumble upon. Because to your point, most people, even coming out of law school, don't even really know as much about it as a practice area. So how did you end up in that practice area? What was that initial
The truth
exposure?
was, I did stumble upon it. I had a small mining client. That small mining client had an activist that was trying to take over the board. I didn't know anything about how to defend it, and I remember I studied it really hard to understand how it was that you defend these companies. We had 2 weeks of really hard work. I enjoyed it. We defended the company, got rid of the aggressors, and I thought, you know what, I want to do this for the rest of my career. So started seeking out these opportunities, and that's how it happened. That's how it happened. Like most things in life, it was a lot of luck.
And I think we often we've had many lawyers on this podcast over time, and this is not an unusual path where people find niches just because they did a piece of work or there was a mentor or some initial partner, for example, early on in their career they did some work with. Next thing you know, they like that area of practice and they end up in this very specific niches
100%.
that otherwise you
Yeah,
don't know existed. So,
exactly.
and I will ask you, Wally, because you are also you've mentored a lot of people over time as well. And to any sort of young or aspiring lawyers, what advice would you have for them along those lines as they think of how their career will evolve, or where to focus on, or what area they should consider? What advice would you have for them?
Well, the first piece of advice I have for them is tireless, thankless, hard work for many years is how you'll start your career. Don't expect thank yous. Don't expect a pat on the back. You might get one if you're lucky enough to sort of work with a partner that is that is in the right headspace or whatever. But it's really, really, really hard work in the first several years, and then to just be patient and to work at it and to be as distinct as you possibly can. I always like to remind folks: people don't hire law firms because their problems are easy to solve. They don't hire law firms so that you could give them an answer that says, on the one hand, here's one input, and on the other hand, here's another input. They're hiring you to give them your best possible answer to the problem that they are facing. And by the way, that means that sometimes things don't go your way. But if you want to distinguish yourself, be creative, be hardworking, give straight answers, no BS. Give your opinion. You're entitled to your judgment, and your judgment sometimes may not be exactly right, but you are absolutely entitled to, and I think that's the key to success in this profession.
And Waleed, now the shifting a bit back more to your personal evolution within the firm. What was the path to chairman, and how did that come about?
Well, I certainly always felt I had a vision for the firm that I wanted to advance, but I didn't actually expect to be, and I was not, so I had a vision for the firm. I also was not interested in the least bit in administrative leadership in the firm, like absolutely not interested in being the managing partner, which is like the CEO of a firm. I just had no interest in dealing with the day-to-day issues of a firm. I had a vision for the firm. I loved my practice, and I kind of thought that it would be something that would come along in the latter part of my career. And it was really our chair at the time decided that he was going to move on to the next phase of his career. And I was encouraged by a number of partners to put my name forward. And there was an election, and I won it. I had a vision for the firm, which we've continued to roll out, which is for Norton Rose to be the leading business law firm in Canada and the employer of choice in each of our markets. We've been advancing that very hard. Norton Rose is today, I think, unquestionably one of the best firms in the country. Certainly one of the most profitable firms in the country. I'd like before I'm done to have the title of being the best firm in the country, and it's something that we're working very, very hard on every single day.
And Walid, how has I believe it's been 7 years right now as chair, if I'm not mistaken. How has that shaped your career? How has that sort of changed your day to day once you took on this leadership role?
So I have really changed how the role is taken on at the firm. I view it as a sort of providing key inputs into the vision, providing the governance role, and providing oversight. That's the role I see. I let it only take about 20% of my time. I try to play a role of advancing the vision and staying out of management, completely out of management. We have an excellent national managing partner. She is a renowned litigator and an excellent attorney. Her name is Jennifer Teskey. And Jennifer does an incredible job managing the firm. And so I view my role as really just providing inputs into the vision that she's advancing and implementing, providing oversight and governance, and really I try my best never to question. I don't think in 7 years with two managing partners did I ever question the positions of management. We've had just really good management running the firm. So it really hasn't changed my day to day that much. I try to speak to as many partners as I can every year. I can't speak to every single one. We have 200 equity partners in Canada. So, even if you were to call, if you were to try to call one every single business day, you'd have a hard time getting through to all of them with all the other responsibilities. So, try my best. And, I also have the role of global chair, which is, I wouldn't even begin to try to speak to sort of every global equity partner in the firm, but certainly try to advance as much of the vision as I possibly can.
Walid, I'm changing gears a little bit, and the capital markets modernization workforce, or task force rather, that was set up. How did that come about? And I know you're chairing it currently, but tell us a little bit. Some of our audience will be familiar with the task force, but some may be hearing about it for the first time.
Yeah, so the work of that task force is actually done, but I had the distinct privilege of chairing the Capital Markets Modernization Task Force for the Government of Ontario, reporting directly to the Minister of Finance, where we had an incredible committee that looked at all facets of the capital markets, in Ontario, to figure out how we could be more competitive. We came up with, over 80 recommendations, and most of them have actually been implemented by the government of Ontario. Our One of the things I learned that's quite fascinating is Ontario has had securities legislation before the SEC had its first securities legislation in the United States. It tells you something about how forward thinking and where our capital markets were in Canada. That Capital Markets Act was 6 pages. We have now 2 huge volumes of regulation in the capital markets arena, and so we've evolved. And what we need to continue to be doing, having a strong capital markets is such a critical indicator of the wealth of the nation, that we need to continually be looking at what is happening around the world. Where are we less competitive? Where are we more competitive? Where are we heavy on regulation? Where are we too low on regulation? You got to get that balance perfect, because you get people talking about regulatory burden like it's a bad thing. Well, look, if you have a capital market where it's easy to scam people, issuers and investors won't operate in that either. So you need the perfect balance between regulation and freedom to operate. And once you have that, you're really able to shine. So our legislation in Ontario actually requires a review of our capital markets every 5 years. That is really followed in the breach. I believe the prior to the committee that I chaired, the prior group was about 15 years that it had been looked at, which is a real shame. So we need to keep this going. I really hope that future governments do this every 5 years. It was a big undertaking, but you want to know something? We all learned a lot. I think we made some good recommendations. A lot of them, like I said, have been implemented, and a lot of them will be part of an iterative process where people will pick up bits of it and hopefully make even better recommendations than the ones we made.
And Walid, to the point you made earlier about the competitiveness for us to remain competitive globally, this is a critical part of encouraging business. So completely appreciate why this is an ongoing process and should be revisited periodically.
100%. Absolutely agreed.
So obviously this is something that you've done for the betterment of our business community and our business in Canada in general, but you're also involved quite a bit in the community on the not-for-profit side and with a variety of organizations. Tell us a little bit about that, Walid, about your involvement in the community and the various causes that you feel passionate about.
Well, first off, I should say I encourage professionals and business leaders to be involved in not-for-profits for 2 reasons. Number one, good is an end in itself. So let's just be clear about that. Doing good is an end in itself. But secondly, I have learned more about being a business leader, about my community, about a sector, medicine, that I knew nothing about. I've learned more being on the Sick Kids board and now being the chair of that foundation than I could ever get back. So, and I think that people who are in the professional sphere and who take on these roles would almost unanimously tell you that, dealing with issues on these boards, even just watching issues roll out and watching how some of these non-for-profits operate and watching some of the problems in our community and understanding the challenges of government and understanding how other people live. That is an honor That is a privilege, and that is something that makes you a better human being and for sure a better business leader. Whenever we're recruiting people to the Sick Kids board, I always like to tell them I work at Bay and King, between Bay and King and Bay and Wellington. Less than 500 meters away is a place called the Hospital for Sick Children. And what happens at the Hospital for Sick Children is so much more important, is so much more interesting, is so much more consequential than anything that anybody in the 3 blocks around me does. And I can tell you, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of people who work in those 3 blocks around me who truly think that what we do every day is the most important thing, is the most important thing in the world. No, actually, 500 meters away, there's a father who's grieving over the death of his baby. There's a mother that is struggling because she's a single mom with a job while she's trying to take care of her asthmatic child or child in the cancer department. There's a researcher that is finding a new gene code that is going to unlock a cure to a disease that nobody thought would be curable. Those things are happening 500 meters away from where I work. And I can tell you that for the first 15 years of my practice, I did not know anything about what was happening 500 meters away, other than that's where people took their children when they were sick. So I'll tell you, for your listeners, it is an honor and privilege to be involved in these types of opportunities. And it is an honor and privilege that will give you way more than any of the time or money that you'll give it.
And Walid, I think that's really resonates with me, and I certainly think will resonate with our listeners. It's extremely important. What would you say if people want to get involved? How do they think of these opportunities? What is the best way to put themselves out there to learn about how they can get involved?
Well, you got to make yourself known that you're interested. The first thing that you need to do if you're interested in participating in the not-for-profit world is just putting up your hand. There's so many opportunities out there. They're not all Sick Kids or Black North or these sort of larger organizations. Some of the organizations that my wife and I have had the most fun dealing with are what I call venture philanthropic causes, which are smaller entities, whether it's a single woman's shelter or a grief hotline. These organizations all provide very important services that make our community strong. And as I was saying earlier, regardless of which one you choose, and that chooses you, you're going to learn more than the value of what you would give them in charity or time.
No, and Walid, I think this one thing I've observed as well. Raising your hand, getting involved, even not everything will end up at the board or foundation level, to your point, but you sometimes can start a bit more grassroots, and then those opportunities tend to emerge a bit more. And then along those lines, one of the things I hear a lot from professionals is, I'm so busy with my career, or I'm so busy with my work, I haven't had the time to prioritize it. So what advice would you have for people when it comes to that? Because clearly it's not that you lack of, you don't have it's not like you don't have enough obligations. It's that you're prioritizing and finding the time to do it and trying to balance it with everything else.
I'll tell you, my dad always used to tell me, you got 24 hours a day, you sleep for 8, make the best use of the 16 that's left. 16 hours is a lot of time. You make time if you're interested. You make time if you're interested, and you reprioritize things, and you make it work. Look, there's certain stages in people's lives where these things won't work. If you're a single mom who is, working in a job, and you don't have a support system, it's really hard to ask that person to put additional time in a philanthropic cause, but maybe that person could do it later in life. There's in most cases there is time. In some cases there aren't, and when there isn't, usually there becomes a time where there is time. And so just be patient is my view.
And Walid, I'm shifting back a little bit to your legal career again. Um, what did you say was like a major challenge you encountered during your work? And that could be anything, much like the example you gave earlier around you had a mining client that had to sort out how to deal with an activist shareholder. And how did you overcome it? Because I think those resilience lessons tend to be something that really resonate with the audience, and they tend to learn from other business leaders, much like yourself.
So I'll tell you, as a lawyer, you build a reputation based on your wins, and my team and I are blessed with having almost universally wins in the work that we do. But it's an amazing thing. You don't remember your wins; you remember your losses. Even however few they are, those are the ones that you remember. But that's actually, in your losses are the moments where your leadership and resilience is most demonstrated. When you've got a client or a situation where you are going down, how do you keep your head up high? How do you extract the client from that situation? How do you manage through that situation? That's your measure of success. And I have to tell you, those files are the ones that I'm actually most proud of, because those are the ones that I knew I couldn't succeed for my client. But I got them the very best result I could possibly get, and knowing that is very very gives me a great deal of satisfaction.
Now, I know the Walied things are evolving a lot in the marketplace, whether it's from a regulation perspective, whether it's industries evolving, etc. How do you stay on top of all these things? The whether it's changing law, changing economic landscape in terms of advising clients. What are some suggestions you have for lawyers in this area?
Well, my number one suggestion is, if you live in Canada and you're a business leader and you don't roll out of bed and read the business section of the Globe and Mail every morning, you're already behind before you've even stepped foot on the floor from your bed. I start every single morning with the business section of the Globe, and honestly, there's enough there to give you a pulse of what is happening in our nation's business capitals and industries. There's enough there to keep you on top of the ball. Over and above that, obviously, it's good to have an understanding of global capital markets and global geopolitical situations, and to understand how they impact your clients and the business. But really, starting with your national business section, that's how you. If you don't, like, when I hear of a lawyer who doesn't start their day like that, they're dismissed in my mind almost immediately. Like, how the heck do you start your day without reading the business section of the Globe and not knowing what's going on?
And Walid, I can tell you work closely with Norm Steinberg, and because I've heard almost the exact same advice from him at one point as well. So there's certainly
He probably gave it to me.
so it is, and you're right. I think that's fundamentally being staying on top of any evolving items is key. And we're in an age where access to information isn't the issue. Is prioritizing and knowing what to get to first, and what matters more, etc. That is typically the issue, as opposed to access or delays the way we may have in the old days, where news just didn't make its way fast enough, and how we reacted to it.
100% agreed.
Walid, I'm going to go to a point that we made earlier, and I want us to spend a little bit more time on this in terms of your predictions around Canadian business and where things are going. So we talked about how important it is to stay competitive, and things that Canada can do and business leaders can do. What do you think our country and our business community should prioritize beyond being competitiveness, in terms of types of businesses to foster, or areas that we should focus more on, as in terms of making sure our economy evolves along those lines?
The key thing for our political and business leaders to be doing is to constantly be looking at our competition and determining how it is that we can be ahead. Our competition is no longer just the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Our competition is now Brazil, India, Dubai. That's our competition, and and it's a very hardworking, attractive competition that is attracting human resources, that is attracting capital, and that is attracting issuers for startups. And that is a remarkable thing. It's a truly, truly, truly remarkable thing. And so we need to ensure we are staying competitive with those places, that we are creating an environment where people want to come here, where people want to invest here, where people want to start businesses here, continue with businesses here. And I just think we are stuck moving on the momentum that we have had since my father came to this country. And that worries me. It worries me a lot. And I hope that we can turn it around.
Well, and Walid, I think your message is loud and clear. Is we should, as business leaders, and we should. This is beyond sort of government itself. It's effort that is multilateral. It's business leaders, governments, not-for-profits, and organizations that look to shape, regulators that look to shape this. So I think we all have our part to do, and to say, hey, we need to make sure we think in that sense, and perhaps in industries that we historically haven't thought about, because we're just thinking about where we've been. It's not necessarily where we're going, and I think all of that ties together to remaining competitive.
Absolutely. 100%. Couldn't agree with you more, Gary.
So, Walid, I'm going to go to just general advice you have for business leaders, and then I'll get us to the final part of our podcast that I call the rapid fire questions. But from a perspective of advice you have for business leaders in general. So, if they are, whether they're leading law firms, whether they are leading their respective businesses, what are some of your learnings you've had historically? You'd say, hey, here's some of the key tips that have been really useful for me in my career that I'd recommend. And some of them we've heard already. Get involved, because contributing to the community is so critical, and that naturally the hard work that comes with it. But any other pieces, just so that I want to make sure that we have this opportunity, because there's so many questions I want to ask you.
I always tell my partners, you've never seen a scene in a movie or in a sitcom where a business leader puts their arm around her lawyer and says, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to the second best lawyer in Canada. Never happens. There's nobody who's ever introduced as the second best. Identify what it is that you can be the best at, and make sure that you're the best at it. So if you're the best mid-market real estate lawyer in Port Carling, Ontario, be the darn best, and define yourself as that, and wake up every morning and be that. The same goes in any other profession, any other skill set. Just be that, and that takes hard work. It takes a big effort, and it takes a lot of resilience. And so I think that's the biggest piece of advice I'd give business leaders.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. Identify your niche and keep iterating to become better and better at it. What better way to say it?
100%.
And I'll move us to what we call the rapid fire questions. Just for this portion, whatever first word that comes to mind is supposed to be a fun, interactive piece. I think nothing terribly elaborate. So the first question is, what is your favorite word or phrase?
Choreography.
What word or phrase do you hate?
Delay.
I love it. What word do you have a hard time pronouncing, if any?
Anti-disestablishmentarianism.
I love it. What is your favorite word or phrase in another language, if any?
C'est la vie.
How many languages do you speak?
I speak two fluently, and one I'm learning.
Excellent. And what's one word to describe yourself by?
Oof. Maybe that's it. Oof.
It's always hard to find one word to describe yourself by, right? So that's always interesting.
Yeah.
Walid, I really appreciate you making the time to join me on the podcast today. There were many more questions I wanted to ask you, and much more that I think the audience would love to hear from you for. But at the same time, what a great opportunity to reach out to you and ask for a coffee, lunch, and have some of those discussions one on one as well.
Thank you very much, Gary. I'm very grateful to you, and I look forward to getting feedback on this.